Hello and welcome to the fourth in our series of webinars, which is all about supported employment and specifically making the most out of Connect to Work scheme. My name is Andrew Hadfield and I'll be chairing the session today. Apologies. Yeah, I'll be chairing the session today on behalf of Can Digital, but until recently I've been working for a number of county councils and I'm also the Vice Chair of LG Comms. Welcome to anyone who's just joined. We've got a fantastic lineup today, so I'm going to make the introductions brief, but just some quick housekeeping. I've already mentioned that we are recording this session and we'll be sending around the slides afterwards, so you don't need to make detailed notes of the specific content, but we are very much focusing these series on mainly county councils and combined authorities, although pleased to see health organisation joining today. And very much we are encouraging people to come forward with your questions and comments throughout the session. So please do come forward to make these as interactive as possible. So on to today's session. First up, we have Nicholas.werran. He is a Partnership Director for Breaking Barriers Innovations, and I certainly know firsthand how fascinating Nick's insights really are in this area, having had him to speak on a previous seminar. So once you've got your slides ready to go, Nicholas, then over to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. My name's Nick, and I'm part of an organisation called Breaking Barriers Innovations, and our focus is around place. Place is a better way to organise things such as public services, and most people, in my experience, agree that place is a better framework than silos in terms of tackling things and making things sustainable. But unfortunately, place doesn't have a budget, organisations do. So a lot of our work in Breaking Barriers Innovations is to identify really interesting examples across the country where place has made a difference and where you can actually demonstrate there's a good return on investment case here. It's just not a nice thing to do, a fluffy thing to do. There's actually a real outcome at the end of this. And a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is around essentially local jobs for local people, which is a big national mission at the moment. So what I want to take you through is a program which we've been involved in facilitating called More and Different, largely with the NHS, but increasingly with local government and combined authorities. We're working with West Midlands Combined Authority, an example, on civil service jobs and opportunities. And I think the two things which I really want to convey in this session is the importance of, if you're going to do something innovative around engagement in terms of gauging new audiences, it's fantastic and it's a really important thing to get right, because our engagement needs to move with the times, and particularly if we're going to get to those people from left behind communities, we can't do things in the traditional way. But it needs to be integrated with a much wider package. We need to think about, after we've engaged with someone, what happens next? Are we just going to ask them to do a really complex form to get a job, or are we going to make it easier for them? So the first thing I want to sort of mention is the importance of actually integrating this within a number of really, really key milestones between someone not having a job and getting a good job and sustaining that job. And I think the second thing I want to convey is that in the background of Connect to Work happens when there's a number of different initiatives happening across the country, all essentially around reducing the skills gap, increasing economic inactivity in places where economic inactivity has been neglected. So there's a lot of things happening incrementally. And I think the main thing to really focus on at systems and organizations at the moment is that actually how we can knit these things together more effectively. So on that basis, the reason More and Different as a program was set up a couple of years ago, our organization was doing a lot of work with a thing called STPs, which became integrated care systems a few years later. And it was really at the time where NHS organisations were thinking, what could they do as systems, which is different for them being a bunch of providers working together. And they had lots of different areas where they think they could actually add value, things which they couldn't tackle by themselves, but they work for a local authority or a housing association, they could do more work on. But after lockdown, it's really interesting. Something happened that all of the places which were working around this all basically wants to do the same thing. They want to do something around economic and activity and local jobs for local people. And the reasons for this is a couple. Firstly, from a health perspective, there's a really important health dividend to have from good employment. You're 5 times more likely to be in poor health if you don't have any job as opposed to having a job. And that doesn't mean good job, it means any job. So there's a very strong correlation there. But if we can fix the employment market, there's a very, very strong chance that we can reduce the level of A&E admissions in hospitals. So it's something which the NHS can't do themselves. They've got to work as a partner within local authorities and wider employers. And I think the second thing is that we've got a track record of lots of pilots, lots of initiatives, lots of good intentions from the top. But increasingly, there's a lot of feedback coming through that these intentions aren't actually delivering. So we take example of apprenticeships. There's been a significant downturn in basically those apprenticeships being taken up by those communities who would most benefit from it, almost halved over a period of a decade. So in terms of engagement and getting things right, we can't do these things from Teams calls. We've got to do this with the community to actually understand why these things aren't working in the first place. And the other thing is that there are really, really interesting examples of merging of where these partnerships are actually paying dividends. So we were involved in a thing called Clacton Place, which has been on the news several times because of the interesting politics of Clacton on Sea. But they've got a long, long track record of decline, things not happening, academics coming in telling people how bad it is to live in Clacton. And they decided, look, this is going to become a public health emergency unless we start thinking about jobs. So the NHS basically led this with partners, and they thought about how, as an NHS system, we could actually use our influencing power to bring in as many different solutions and opportunities to this one location in Northeast Essex. So they're thinking about offshore winds, they're thinking about the Freeport, the Tearcat Hub. But the central of this was a peer research program. So they actually worked with the community to think, okay, why aren't these things working historically? How can we make them easier? And so when they actually came up to new infrastructure opportunities, when they built the new community diagnostic centre, they were prepared and they were thinking early on as possible, how can we make as many of these opportunities as possible, particularly the non-clinical ones, the estates jobs which go into it, the admin posts, how can we make these locally accessible? So they worked with the DWP, the voluntary sector, the college, to make sure that people were sort of match fit ready when this came around. So basically, it didn't become another nice shiny new building. It became a catalyst for about 217 people who were engaged as a result of this. And that's just one example of the 10 projects which Clacton Place engineered. So there's lots of things happening. I think from the perspective of things like Connect to Work, there's interesting intergenerational focus. So we know we're getting older as a country, and people are living longer, very often in poorer health. But this isn't just about young people. This isn't just about people entering their middle age like myself. This is about a number of different solutions required to different cohorts, and the engagement and the messaging needs to be tailored and fine-tuned to each one, which is why I think the importance of an innovative approach, such as one can provide, is really, really critical. Because actually, if you're not spending time in the space where you want the intervention to happen, you're not going to get the results. So I think there's a big intergenerational aspect of it. Just in terms of where we are in terms of the More and Different program, it cuts across 14 different integrated care system and local authority locations at the moment. So it's got quite a bit of scale over the last 2 years, and it's aimed at two focuses: new roles which are coming through from the system, which could be applicable to people, and thinking about different candidates applying for the roles. And it comes at a time when there's a lot of things happening all at the same time, and there's always the feeling that we should wait until we get all of the blueprints signed off and all of the visions for this settled. But if we wait till all of this to happen, nothing will happen. So I think it's going to happen, things like Connect to Work, at a quite messy time. And I think it's about actually using a very, very dynamic way of understanding the projects and understand what's happening, what's not working throughout to actually make this work. So there's lots of things happening. And I think the main thing is to make sure that this happens at place level. So these things are combining and reinforcing each other. Those are the sites from the year one of the program across the country. We've been working with JP on, I think, at least 3 or 4 of those locations, particularly Surrey, which I'll talk about. And all of them are focusing on different types of cohorts, and all of them require different tailored approach in terms of engagement. And there's a lot of useful cross-learning across the locations. And our work has been around engaging different stakeholders, so the employers, the people on universal credits, the HR directors, the industry, and seeing basically what is the practical things which can be delivered at strength around this. And because we've had so many insights, we're starting to not hit anything new, which means that we're just sort of pinning down where the real gaps are. And what we're seeing from an HR perspective, if you're looking at something like this, you're seeing big problems in terms of recruitment and retention at the moment. But the more feedback you get from the users, the employers, you're hearing a lot of other challenges. Probably the number one challenge, which we hear from left behind communities, is around transport. And there's been a lot of disconnect since lockdown in terms of employers and applicants. Lots of other ones. There's a big portfolio around this, but what depicts is basically there's a lot more beneath the surface in terms of dealing with things rather than just some of the things which are visible at the moment. And in terms of the priority interventions, I think it's more than just engagement, but there's things as employers. So the NHS uses this awful thing called NHS Track, which they're trying to get rid of at the moment, which is basically there's no point solving the engagement process if they've then got to do a really mind-boggling bureaucratic exercise. You've got to deal with all of it. So there's a lot of evidence there. I'm happy to share a report if people are interested in it. But there's 6 consistent intervention points for programs which connect to work, which are really important. It begins with the awareness, which is the stuff which Can Digital do really cleverly and innovatively at the moment. But then even before you get the interview, there's changes within the pre-application and the application process which need to be dealt with because these are other barriers towards this. The interview process itself comes up. We need to move away from this very traditional adversarial sort of situation to something far more pastoral. And there's no point doing all of this stuff up to recruitment, right, unless we've got a good induction process, which means supporting someone when they're employment. Because if we do all that work and someone leaves in the first day, which also happens in social care, all the other expense and effort, it's a waste of time, essentially. And you're actually setting that person back another 12 months, potentially. So it's about thinking about all those 6 intervention points. And the really exciting thing about More and Different at the moment is actually they're using that learning and actually pioneering new ways to do that across those 6 elements. So in Surrey, they've decided to focus around 50 to 54s and people trapped in in-work poverty, which have been identified by the county as being their 2 top priority areas for intervention. The work which More and Different has been doing has to recruit a number of anchor employers to actually open up their employment and recruitment process to reflect and change that. So we've got some really interesting ones way outside of the NHS and local government in industry as well. And seeing it from their perspective has been really helpful in terms of learning from this. And they've been asked to basically apply those 6 interventions and change their processes to reflect that. And part of that's been to have more user insights in those 2 groups. And just in terms of that, so we're looking for all of those ones. Really interesting. Central government have actually accomplished the most in the short time. They've actually really changed their process to reflect that, and they're opening up 3 new roles for this, which is small, but for the central government, it's big for them. But the very exciting thing is that we're working with Surrey County Council, and Surrey County Council have brought in Can Digital to look at these 3 areas. And so JP is about to launch in the next few weeks a number of campaigns reflecting those anchor organisations tailored to those people. So I'll stop sharing there, but I think the main things which have come through this is that we're really very tangible. outputs which work for all of the organizations. So the employers need to think that they're actually getting different workforce pipelines as a result of this. They've got to see retention rates include this. This has got to be translated to business as usual, particularly in social care at the moment, where they're about to go through an epic change in terms of their workforce models because of the changes of immigration status. And they've got to see scalability of it. And essentially, it's got to be far more less on consulting things and far more on delivering. But I shall stop sharing there, Andrew, because I may have gone over my time slot.
Thank you, Nicholas. Not at all. Yeah, some really fascinating insights that I do want to try and drill into around the questions, but also really nicely teed up for our next speaker in terms of John Paul Dennon. I'm sure many of you know JP as the Collaboration Director at CAN, which works exclusively with public sector organisations. And I think he's going to be talking a little bit about the work at Surrey, but also how to get the most effective channels. So over to you, JP.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, Nick, for that. It's so useful to understand the environment that we're operating in and what might be coming down, and as well bringing together all of these experiences and learnings from across the country. There's a huge opportunity soon to, I think, make a real difference using both public sector recruitment, also our ability to offer skills education to affect local economies, opportunity for people, but also that impact point around the impact on health of being employed, what that does for people's lives is so important. I think that's why we're motivated to do what we do here. But I wanted to sort of collate a lot of examples of some of the challenges. Nick touched on some of them. What we're learning and what is the emerging best practice, and things that you can do now to prepare yourself for Connect to Work, but maybe also widening access programs, generally anything to do with driving opportunity in your area. So looking, as Nick mentioned, track. There are some really big barriers to achieving our objectives around giving opportunity to everybody, and particularly focusing that opportunity on to targeting people who may have individual educational needs and so on. So we've simplified this to the barriers being reach, user experience, and the availability of support. And when we talk about reach, it is very common for employment recruitment campaigns to maybe be published, to maybe be allegedly amplified on organic social media, and for then a lot of money potentially to be spent on jobs boards and platforms like LinkedIn. But when you look at where your local population is, particularly lower income households, you can really see that there's a lot of fragmentation around media consumption, and that publish mentality rather than a reach mentality may actually accentuate inequalities. So if you're only publishing your opportunities to people that happen to follow the council on social media, happen to be subscribed to your e-newsletter and things like that, you're probably highly likely to be missing the people you actually want to target. And so knowing where your target audiences are online, how to reach them and how to reach them efficiently is really important. And I think it's one of the largest barriers which we're helping people address. The second, and this isn't to shame anyone, particularly sorry, but is user experience. There are often landing pages and experiences which frankly suffer from the TMI, the too much information syndrome. This leads to being very confusing and very hard for people to work out what the next step should be. And this point, as Nick pointed to, is very important to fix before you turn on your amplification. And so understanding this and improving this, and also weaving into an accessible user experience is the ability for people to say, I'd like some help, or I'd like to have a conversation before. connecting that human support element, particularly for people with long-term physical or mental health conditions, particularly for people with special educational needs. This is essential and very, very simple to do. And the idea of taking people from an advert to a full application is antiquated. What it's much better to do is to give people a positive, simple experience of your brand, and then enable them to give a very small amount of information, which you can then nurture those people with human interaction, with digital interaction towards opportunities. So these are sort of some of the emerging trends that we're seeing. And these are what we've done in terms of filtering those emerging trends into some basic public sector employment communication principles. So top of that list must be inclusivity. Also, we, being the public sector, we need to make sure we're not wasting money, or to put it another way, always saving money. And we must prove the impact of what we're doing. If we're taking DWP money, DFE money, we need to submit evaluation and data that demonstrates that we got good value for that. So just to give those a bit more detail, when we're talking about inclusive amplification, we need to reach 95+% of target audiences. And that's why the human and the physical element is important alongside the digital. Digital will do most of your amplification and heavy lifting, but you must have that human connection, that human support, and that human insight, which is where breaking barriers are absolutely fantastic. And in terms of content, the use of stories, and I'll show you an example soon that's hot off the press, which we're very excited about using in Buckinghamshire. We also need to make sure that we're always saving. So how are we using what we have to reduce cost per quality engagement? That might be just someone submitting a bit of information, but it might also be a full-scale application. How do we reduce that cost, or to put it another way, get as many quality applications as we can for a limited budget? One of the key tricks to doing that is to switch away from non-measurable, inefficient paid channels towards council-owned channels, and to generally reduce the use of unmeasurable media. If you do that, then you're able to then see what's happening. And that's where number 3 could be number 1 on this, but nothing without data. You've got to make sure that you can prove that you've reached the audience, that you've driven applications, and then evaluate the savings that you've made. So if you apply those principles, you'll be on the right track to delivering meaningful use. And it's really important as well that when you run these campaigns or run amplification, that you have this graph. If you can't see this graph, you're not getting given this graph by your agency or your internal teams, you cannot work out what isn't working, and you cannot optimize. What we're seeing here is blue line interactions, orange line submissions, and that blue line going down over time and then going up, but going up in line with submissions as we optimize the campaign. And that's really what good looks like in this field, and it's very important that you're able to see, evaluate, and then obviously share this data back with the people who are giving you the funding. Just some tips to save you a lot of time on channel choice. A lot of channels might seem sensible in theory, but when you look at this data, TikTok, due to its poor targeting capabilities, X, due to its very low reach apart from amongst journalists and politicians, Nextdoor to its very low, because of its very low frequency, and LinkedIn because of its high cost per click, mean we generally recommend not using those channels or not preferring those channels for these kinds of campaigns. Also, previous campaign data says that use of radio, TV, out of home, even some of the local news providers, does not generate low cost per outcomes, and so it's often best to not use those, or try and get them for free if you can, if you really must have them. But that is what the data is showing us. The standard amplification mix, the proven and low cost amplification mix, is the public sector owned estate, so public sector owned out of home, the public sector digital assets, websites, email, and so on. Direct mail does actually move the dial and is essential to reaching digitally divided or disgruntled digital individuals, then the Google infrastructure, the Meta infrastructure, and the Snapchat infrastructure are platforms that give you both excellent targeting capabilities and low cost per application, proven many times over in previous campaigns. Some of those previous campaigns include something we've just run down in Plymouth, using images of real people who work in care in real places in Plymouth, recognizable, showing large groups of them to socially norm working in care, and promoting a range of career pathways and events for people to come and find out more. We use search advertising around news, not much social actually, to generate 522 submissions in a relatively short period of time, and that included an event where 86 people who turned up at the event had come from this campaign. So turning well-chosen imagery into in-person interactions in a very short space of time. Southwest London ICB have been working on inclusive recruitment, so targeting people on the platforms they're using. So that could be using international news platforms, Google and Bing search, and also the Snapchat platform, to nudge people towards a really accessible mobile landing page, and generating overall 688 responses. But you can see in the 3 phases of that campaign that the cost per response was going down, i.e. the number of impressions and interactions generated to generate response is improving as we optimize. And the client actually had to switch the campaign off multiple times because of the number and quality of people that were coming through. So that's one where these tactics are really working, and it's a part of their always on recruitment activity. Mentioned early on about Surrey, they had a campaign getting people with long-term physical and mental health challenges in to connect with support from a set of voluntary organisations. This campaign generated about 1,500 form fills, and on that form you stated that you had a long-term physical or mental health condition. And we know so far that over 360 people have started that course with the voluntary organisations, which, if 1 in 10 of them complete, will result in £250,000 worth of savings in terms of care packages. If 1 in 4 complete, it'll be £750,000 savings for about a £30,000 of investment. So every pound put into this campaign will save that adults team between £7 and £19, and we can prove that by evaluating. And that's sort of a really good example of how we can sustain investment in communications by measuring, by evaluating, and by optimizing. I wanted to show you something as well. This is soon to launch in Milton Keynes, and it's actually using Home Office funding to target young people in Milton Keynes, to give them a sense of opportunity. It's about community cohesion. It's about protecting young people against various forms of extremism, including county lines, criminal activity, misogynistic, white supremacist, or some religious fundamentalist activity, by helping them understand that there are opportunities for them now. But we've briefed the creative agency, Turn the Page, to create something that actually will help recruitment at the same time. So I'm just going to show you this creative to give you a sense. It will be distributed on Snapchat. It's targeted at people who are likely to be from low-income backgrounds and potentially unpaid carers.
Mum needs me. I've never put her second, but yeah.
Can I just check if you can hear that?
It's hard. You don't get much time for you. But now I can get out, meet mates, and get to school more. That help has been a game changer. Better for Mum, better for me, better for the family. I can be Mum's carer and a 15-year-old with a future too. In MK, I can.
What we're going to do here before showing this creative is ask the audience on Snapchat, this particular 16 to 24 group, do they feel there's opportunity for them in MK? Anyone that interacts with this ad will be taken through to courses designed for them to help train them in a career in social care. And in a similar vein, in the same campaign, there's this creative.
My mum kept telling me, get off your backside. I saw an ad to volunteer as a police cadet and thought, yeah, I'll try it. Keep her quiet. And I've done some amazing things here. Undercover operations, big events, and I've met people I'll call friends for life. It was like the best decision I've ever made. Mum's always right, isn't she? In MK, I can.
So the idea of using and connecting various different campaigns that might mitigate the risk of youth offender behaviour, but connect that with recruitment and with opportunity, I think is something that would be really exciting to see a lot more of. So in terms of things you can do now, I think there's a lot of things in recruitment we can stop doing. There are a lot of channels that we're in habits of buying that we can stop, untargeted media usage, and also media usage that doesn't reach the target audience. I think is something that we could stop wasting time and money on. Settling for poor user experience, there's no need to do it. Creating really accessible user experience is low cost and really pays a dividend when you turn campaigns on. And also the creative that you use, I mean, making those ads there, they will work at least 5 times better than standard ads, which will generate far more return on investment, and they cover their costs many times over. Also, in terms of collaboration, sharing assets that have worked in other locations, tailoring them to your locations is a very quick and easy way of getting messages that will resonate with people. If it's worked somewhere else, there's a strong chance it'll work where you are. So borrow tactics like search, like council site remarketing, like using limited amounts of social media, and then use the council's owned estate, the out-of-home website, email. Councils are the biggest media owners in their area, but they rarely act like it. And those they can facilitate always on recruitment campaigns. The need for social workers, the need for specific careers isn't going to go away. And so having always on campaigns by collaborating using that estate is really powerful. And then listen, not just to experts like Nick, but also to the audiences about the barriers they face. I've never had someone speak to the audiences that they're trying to recruit from and not find out something they weren't thinking of, or some barrier that they hadn't realized, cultural, learning, or even user experience. So it's essential to do that. And that's where that human interaction can really yield so much as you work. Make sure you can see what's working on in your campaign. If you can't see the campaign working, maybe switch to CAN, or find a way of seeing that impact happening so that you can then optimize. Campaigns aren't just put them in motion and then review at the end. You can review in real time and reduce cost per outcome in real time and learn in real time. And that's something that's really exciting about this technology, and something that we would thoroughly recommend you doing in order to improve access to opportunity, and to support employment in your area. So that was just a quick whiz through some of the things that we're doing. If you want any free insight, any examples, drop me a line there. Thank you, Andrew, for hosting this, and thank you, Nick, for your input earlier on.
Brilliant. Thanks, JP. Yeah, some brilliant insights there in terms of what works in practice. I know that I've got some thoughts or questions to ask, particularly from a sort of practitioner perspective, as you were going through some of those creative examples, but also very keen to open it up to people who are on the call. So you've got Nicholas and JP's wisdom there. Who wants to sort of come forward and ask the first question, or in fact give your own perspective? You know, do these kind of issues resonate with you? Are you already one of the areas in terms of connect to work, or is this a really tricky issue that has been sort of raised with you as a communicator to fix, just perhaps tripping over some of those tripwires that have been identified here. I guess just to get it going, Nicholas, what I was very keen to know from your perspective, although I really love your intro about, focused on place, and I know you've given some really excellent examples like Clacton, which I think will continue to be an area of interest, particularly from the political sense. But I think from my perspective, I was really keen to know, what's the next step that sort of people on the call here should be doing? How do they get their local area involved if they're not already involved? And yeah, how can they focus on that kind of key takeaway that you sort of put around, don't wait for perfection, focus on place and get going now. So yeah, perhaps you can pick on one or two of those kind of key areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of reflections. A lot of the left behind areas across the country, uh, they've been inundated with visions and pilots and people who kind of look a bit like me going in and saying we're from the government or we're from this consultancy and we're here to help, and nothing ever changes. So I think really, Connect to Work is an opportunity to provide some locally tailored resource to make change happen. And I wouldn't, I don't, I think perfection will be the enemy of all of this. So I think don't worry for structures to align perfectly for next round of devolution to happen. There's always going to be something which is going to happen to get in the way. I think fundamentally, if you work your way back from here, what we want to achieve? We want to actually have the employers owning this agenda and translating this into business as usual. To get rid of so many of the barriers which are getting people into good jobs, which are basically about processes and lack of engagement. So I think work from that. In order to do that, they need evidence over employers about doing something differently in terms of engagement, in terms of pre-employment, and you use this opportunities, which won't be forever in terms of Connect to Work, use these opportunities around resource to really demonstrate the effect of doing something differently and not just something good socially. It's great to have a human benefit here, of course, but also what is the bottom line for the business? How are they actually going to improve their retention and recruitment and have a better workforce as a result of this? I think that's really, really important. JP's points about capturing what's working in real time and also what's not working in real time, because without that, all we've got is people joining a Teams call once every quarter saying, oh, we did some Facebook things and we got 50 likes. Did you get any jobs? No. Oh, but it was a great thing that we did it. I think it's got to be, we've got to move away from that amateur approach and move into a more systemic approach to some of the stuff.
Brilliant, thanks, Nicholas. And yeah, definitely, I heard that loud and clear about owning the agenda, and I think you previously shared some really great examples of where some local areas have got employees or future employees directly involved in shaping some of those town hall type things or avoiding those big town hall systems. Just coming to you, JP, I think really liked some of those creatives from Milton Keynes, and I guess from my sort of practitioner background, I was wondering whether you or the teams that you worked with had any sort of barriers from perhaps some of the senior leaders in terms of really pushing ahead with that kind of creative approach, but also how did you convince some of the kind of the internal skeptics about the avoiding the TMI approach and just going for those simple kind of information capture approaches?
Well, first bit of advice, I think it's a huge mistake to ask for their feedback because they're not the target audience. What they have there in Milton Keynes is a youth council, and it was agreed cleverly in the first place that the youth council would have sign off on the creatives rather than the greying senior leadership team there. Also with this campaign, it's going to be on Snapchat, so their chances of seeing it are almost zero as well. And we've seen with other issues in public health and things like that, even if you are getting pushback, what you can do is say, well, look, let's see if we do get any negative feedback at scale from residents, not the usual trolls. Let's also try the central creative, and let's try exactly what you think in the first week, and we'll see which gets the most applications, which gets the most interaction. Because I think moving from a risk management and a publishing mindset to a performance marketing mindset is really, and once the data shows that no one really minds about the creative approach. Very few people actually know who your organization actually is. What they care about is the story, and that they're feeding back positively and engaging. It helps everyone relax. So yes, I would never accept, or I would never deliberately try and get SLT sign off on creative. I think that's a huge strategic error. You talk about co-creation, you talk about building that creative with the audience, and then you talk about evidence. And good leadership will usually accept that. Saying that, if you're getting micromanaged in that sense by people, there are ways around it, and you can make everything work. In those instances, I would show examples of this sort of thing working in other places, and noting that the sky didn't fall in that area. And then in terms of the risk register for an organization, asking them to quantify where this might actually sit on this organization's risk register, and therefore should we give it the appropriate amount of time. It's so important to get across that let communications do communications work, in the same way that you wouldn't interfere with the way a legal document was drafted or the way the accounts were submitted. Communications is a profession, and we really do know what we're doing. So trust us, and also trust us to react if there's something that goes really wrong with this.
I've just got a couple of things just to mention, if I may, Andrew. I think firstly, the stuff which the examples which JP are doing are really, really important, and I think the more evidence we got about what's working around the engagement piece and how it links into the those wider interventions is really important time for the next 12 months for Connect to work again. Because if we are going to sustain that, we need to show a real strong return on investment. So we're very, very pleased that CAN are supporting Surrey Council and BLMK, and I think Norfolk and Waveney on our projects. We are organising with Lord Patel of Bradford and a number of DWP officials a special Breaking Barriers event in late June with CAN to think about some of the strategic areas of focus for this, and we would very, very much welcome people in this call to be part of it, because I think what we want to understand is how we can make the Connect to Work agenda as effective as possible, and almost like black box thinking. Let's think in a few years' time, if the thing crashed and burned, let's avoid those mistakes right now. So I think it's very, very valuable stuff. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Nicholas. JP?
Just that something we encounter quite frequently is it looks too good to be true. We can assure you it is. Sometimes then we get the concern that that's very expensive. It is surprisingly cheap versus what you're doing at the moment. Persisting with strategies that don't work is incredibly expensive, and also it's very demotivating. The sense of achievement and the sense of positivity from adopting these approaches makes our jobs really enjoyable and really fulfilling. And I would suggest using that as a motivator for adopting these ways of doing things.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, JP. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Really useful session again. Really important and contemporary agenda. As I think Nicholas said, it's very much high on the government's missions, and very much in line with those the growth agenda. So thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for joining the session, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.